Greg was the sort of guy who didn't sweat the small stuff. Actually, he didn't sweat the big stuff either. Known for his easygoing nature, Greg had never felt the need to put down roots or plan beyond the next weekend. He was a drifter, the kind who seemed to move through life without consequence or caution, collecting experiences like loose change that he never bothered to count. One autumn afternoon, he found himself in a small coastal town. There was nothing special about it, just a quiet place with streets lined with maples and oak trees that painted the sidewalks in fiery reds and soft yellows. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of the sea and the promise of a chilly winter. He stumbled upon a job in a little bookshop owned by a woman named Margie, who needed help with renovations. Margie was an elderly woman with a warm smile and a stack of books that nearly reached the ceiling. She welcomed Greg with a pot of tea and a slice of blueberry pie, a kindness that made him stay longer than he'd intended. Greg spent his days sanding shelves, repainting walls, and organizing stacks of old novels and poetry collections. Margie paid him in cash, along with daily meals that were far better than he deserved. For the first time in a long time, Greg felt a strange sense of peace, like he was part of something, even if it was just a tiny bookshop that smelled of dust and lavender. Weeks went by, and the people in town got used to seeing Greg around. They'd wave as he walked by or chat with him over coffee at the local cafe. It was strange and nice, and he found himself wondering if maybe he'd stay through the winter. Just a few months, he told himself. Nothing permanent. One evening, after closing the shop, Margie invited him to her house for dinner. She poured him a glass of wine, and they talked about everything from her childhood adventures to his fleeting stops in cities across the country. She laughed as he recounted a story of narrowly escaping a stint as a wedding photographer in Texas. "Well, I suppose you're going to drift off again soon," Margie said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But it's been nice having you around." Greg smiled, but something stirred in him. He didn't want to disappoint her, didn't want to admit that he'd already been thinking about moving on. The thought of staying, however, felt equally uncomfortable. He didn't belong anywhere. Not really. "Easy come, easy go," he replied lightly, though he knew it sounded hollow. 2 days later, he packed his bag. The urge to leave was overwhelming. He couldn't quite explain it, but something inside told him to go before he got too attached. Before anyone started expecting him to stick around, he left a note on the bookshop counter, thanking Margie for everything and leaving behind his last paycheck, feeling like it was a small way to repay her kindness. A few days later, while hitching a ride out of town, he found himself looking back at the place, feeling an unfamiliar pang of regret. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself that he was better off moving on, that there were other towns and other people waiting. But as he continued down the road, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd left something more valuable behind. In the following months, Greg moved on as he always had, but he kept remembering the little bookshop and Margie's warm smile. For the first time, he felt the weight of a place he'd left behind. "Easy come, easy go," he reminded himself, though he knew the words had lost their meaning.